The Arizona sun was a hammer on the back of my neck. I squinted through the shimmering heat waves rising off the barren, rust-colored landscape, my hand resting on the worn stock of my Remington 700. Below me, in the basin of what the maps called Coyote Wash, a cloud of dust moved with a slow, persistent purpose. That was them, the Johnsons, or what was left of them. My name is Eli McCade. I used to be a systems analyst in Phoenix. That feels like a lifetime ago, a ghost life from before the cascade. Nobody calls it the same thing. The collapse, the great burn, the silencing. Technically, it was a cascading failure of the global power grid, triggered by a solar storm they saw coming but couldn't stop. Everything with a sophisticated chip fried. The world didn't end with zombies or nukes, it ended with a long, descending whistle of dead satellites and a silence so profound it hurt your ears. Then the real noise began, the noise of desperation. I'd been holed up in the old ranger station on the ridge for 7 months. It was a good spot, defensible, with a hidden spring and a cache of non-perishables the previous occupant, God rest his soul, hadn't lived long enough to enjoy. I'd seen groups come and go through the wash, scavengers, families fleeing the burning cities, marauders. Most were like moths, fluttering weakly against the vast, indifferent windshield of the desert. I thought they'd tire fast. The desert had a way of winnowing the weak from the strong, the foolish from the prepared. A day, maybe 2, of that sun, with limited water, chasing whispers of a supposed safe haven in the north. They'd break. They always did. The Johnsons were different. I first saw them 3 days ago. A man, a woman, a young boy about 10, and an older girl, maybe 16. They had a single, overburdened handcart, not an ATV or a horse. Their clothes, once practical hiking gear, were now faded and dust-caked. They moved with a ragged rhythm, but they never stopped for long. The man, Jack, had the build of a former landscaper or construction worker, solid, but carrying a new gauntness. The woman, Sarah, had a fierce, protective energy I could feel even from 300 yards through my scope. The boy, Sammy, was a trooper, but his steps were dragging. The girl, Chloe, was their scout, often moving ahead, her eyes scanning the ridges. She had a sharpness to her, a vigilance that set her apart. On the first day, I watched from my perch as they made a dry camp at midday, conserving energy. They shared a single canteen, rationing with a discipline I hadn't seen in other travelers. Jack and Sarah spent an hour rigging a tarp for shade while Chloe kept watch, a hatchet in her hand. Sammy just sat, his head on his knees. I thought, tonight, the cold will sap them, or the coyotes will spook them. They'll tire. They didn't. They posted watches in 2-hour shifts. I heard the faint murmur of Jack's voice telling a story to Sammy, a low rumble in the vast silence before the coyotes began their serenade. They didn't light a fire. On the second day, the heat was worse. Sammy stumbled and fell, skinning his knee. He didn't cry out loud, but I saw his small shoulders heaving. Sarah knelt, cleaned the wound with a precious dribble of water, and wrapped it with a strip of cloth. Jack lifted the boy onto the cart, adding his slight weight to their load. They redistributed their gear without a word, a well-practiced team. Chloe took point, her eyes constantly sweeping the high ground. For a heart-stopping moment, she seemed to look directly at my position, a crevice in the rocks I was sure was invisible. Her gaze lingered, then moved on. Now, I thought, the boy's hurt. The load is heavier. The mother's worried. The father's shoulders are sagging. They'll argue. They'll look at the endless desert and the impossible distance and their spirit will crack. They'll tire. They kept going. Their pace slowed, but it never ceased. It was a relentless, grinding forward motion, like the last turn of a dying watch. Jack would look at Sarah, and she'd give a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. That was all. No dramatic speeches. Just a nod, and he'd adjust his grip on the cart handles and press on. By the third day, a strange feeling twisted in my gut. It wasn't pity. Pity was a luxury that got you killed. It was something else, a dull, uncomfortable awe, mixed with a rising irritation. Why wouldn't they just quit? Why wouldn't they do what was sensible and find a cave to hole up in, or turn back? Their stubbornness was a challenge to my entire worldview. I had survived by being smarter, harder, and more isolated than the world that had died. I'd written off the idea of groups, of family, as a fatal liability. Yet here this one was, defying the calculus of survival, moving like a single, weary, but unbreakable organism through the hellscape. I found myself tracking them not just as a potential threat, but as a spectator. My rifle lay beside me, forgotten for minutes at a time. I watched Chloe spot a half-hidden prickly pear cactus. She called out softly. They stopped. With careful hands, using a bandana to protect her skin, she harvested the prickly fruit, avoiding the fierce spines. Sarah used a multi-tool to peel them, and they shared the moist, tart flesh. It was a tiny victory, a sip of life from the desiccated land. Sammy smiled for the first time I'd seen, a bright flash in his grimy face. That smile did something to me. It was an artifact from the old world, a spark that shouldn't have been able to survive here. I looked away, a hot shame flushing my cheeks. I hadn't smiled in months. My survival was a grim, joyless equation. Theirs, against all odds, seemed to still have a heartbeat. That afternoon, the desert decided to test them for real. I saw the dust cloud on the southern horizon before they did. Not the fine powder of foot travel, but the churned, aggressive bloom of vehicles. Motorized transport was rare now, a sign of serious power, or serious menace. 2 modified dirt bikes and a jury-rigged jeep emerged from the heat haze, heading straight for the wash. Marauders. The Scorchers, they called themselves. I'd had run-ins with their scouts before. They were locusts, stripping everything in their path. My hand went back to my rifle. This was it. The Johnsons would scatter. They'd be run down. The desert would claim them, not through exhaustion, but through violence. Part of me, the cold, surviving part, whispered, "Not your problem. They are a distraction. Let the wolves thin the herd." The Scorchers roared into the basin, encircling the family with a spray of gravel and loud, whooping calls. There were 5 of them, clad in mismatched leather and tactical gear, faces hidden by goggles and scarves. The leader, a hulking man with a shock of bleached hair, cut the engine of his bike and swaggered towards Jack, who had stepped in front of his family. "Well, what do we have here?" The leader's voice carried up to me, oily and loud. "A little family road trip. You're a long way from the minivan, Daddy-o." Jack stood silent, his hands open at his sides. Sarah had pulled Sammy behind her. Chloe stood slightly apart, her hatchet held low, her eyes calculating the distance to the nearest biker. "We don't want trouble," Jack said, his voice calm, firm. "We've got nothing of value." "Nothing." The leader laughed, gesturing to their cart. "Water, food, that toolbox, and," his gaze slid over Sarah and lingered on Chloe, "other assets. You've got plenty." He took a step forward. Jack didn't move. The other Scorchers dismounted, spreading out. The tension was a wire about to snap. I saw the leader's hand drop to the knife at his belt. My crotches found the center of his chest. The ethical math of my new world was clear. Intervene, and I reveal my position, my stockpile, my life. I'd become a target. I'd forfeit my safety for strangers who were doomed anyway. Every instinct screamed to stay hidden. But I saw Sarah's hand tighten on Sammy's shoulder. I saw Chloe's knuckles whiten on the hatchet handle. I saw Jack's back, straight and unyielding, a wall between his family and the abyss. And I remembered the nod. That simple, silent communication between husband and wife. A language of unity I thought was extinct. My finger settled on the trigger. The shot was a thunderclap in the dry air. It didn't hit the leader. I aimed high, the round cracking into the sandstone cliff face 20 feet above him, showering him with grit. Every head snapped up towards my ridge. Confusion reigned for 3 precious seconds. "Sniper!" one of the Scorchers yelled. I worked the bolt, firing again, this time hitting the front tire of the Jeep with a metallic spang. "Next one's through your engine block," I shouted, my voice echoing strangely in the basin. "Then I start on heads." "Leave them be." The leader hesitated, rage and fear warring on his face. He looked at Jack, at the cart, at the unassailable high ground I held. The math was different for him now. The cost had just skyrocketed. "This ain't over," he snarled, a pathetic retreat masked as bravado. He kicked his bike to life, and the others followed. In a whirl of dust and angry noise, they fled back the way they came. Silence descended, heavier than before. The Johnsons were a frozen tableau. Then, as one, they all looked up at my ridge. I stood up, slowly, leaving my rifle propped against the rock. I raised my empty hands. We stood there for a long minute, 100 yards of air and distrust between us. It was Chloe who moved first. She said something to her father. Jack studied me, then gave a single, slow nod. Not the nod he gave Sarah. This was different. Acknowledgement, caution, not trust, but a ceasefire. They didn't wave. They didn't call out thanks. They simply regrouped. Jack checked the cart. Sarah wiped Sammy's face. Chloe never took her eyes off me. Then, they did the most astonishing thing. They kept going. They picked up the traces of their handcart and resumed their march north, as if the armed confrontation had been nothing more than a brief, inconvenient squall. I thought they'd be terrified. I thought they'd be grateful. I thought they'd want to talk, to ally, to take. They just moved. Their relentless, grinding forward motion was more powerful than any marauder's threat. It was their defining characteristic. I sat back down behind my rock, my heart pounding. I had broken my own cardinal rule, Don't get involved. For what? They hadn't even waited for me to come down. The absurdity of it hit me. I'd risked everything, and they hadn't even paused. As dusk painted the sky in violet and orange, I made a decision. It was insane. It went against every survival protocol I'd lived by since the Cascade. But I had to know. I had to understand that relentless motion. I packed a light kit, water, some jerky, my sidearm, binoculars. I left the relative safety of the ranger station and moved like a shadow along the ridge, parallel to their path below. I followed them. For 2 more days, I followed. I watched their routine, their unspoken communication. I saw Jack teach Sammy how to set a simple snare. It failed. I saw Sarah share her own water ration with Chloe, claiming she wasn't thirsty. I saw Chloe, every evening, climb a small rise to scan the horizon, her eyes always searching. For what? Safety, threat, or something else. On the 3rd night of my shadowing, I got too close. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of their small, carefully shielded fire, just enough to boil a handful of dried beans, directly to me, but also carrying my scent down to them. I was in a scrub oak thicket, watching through my binos, when I heard the soft crunch of a footstep behind me. Don't move, Chloe's voice said. It was flat, tired, but held a core of steel. Hands where I can see them. I slowly raised my hands. She moved into view, her hatchet held ready. She looked older up close, her eyes holding a weariness that no 16-year-olds ever should. You've been following us since the Scorchers, she stated. Why? You want the cart. You want payment for the help we didn't ask for. No, I said, my voice rough from disuse. I had to see. See what? How you keep going. She studied me, her gaze picking apart my gear, my face. You're the one from the ridge, the sniper. Eli, I said. Chloe. She didn't lower the hatchet. You thought we'd tire fast. It wasn't a question. She'd known I was there, watching, from almost the beginning. My assumptions, my superiority, all of it had been visible to her. Yeah, I admitted, the shame returning. I did. Everyone does, she said, and for the first time, a crack appeared in her armor. A profound, bottomless sorrow. They see a family. They see a kid. They see the cart. They think we're soft. They think the desert will break us. They think grief will break us. Grief. Her jaw tightened. Our youngest, Mia. She was 6. Fever. 4 weeks after the Cascade. We buried her outside Flagstaff. She said it without inflection, but the words hung in the dark air like stones. We're not going just to survive, Eli. We're going because stopping us, it's remembering. It's letting the silence in. The moving, the keeping going, that's the memorial. Every step is not here. Every mile is not yet. For Sammy, for each other. The revelation was a physical blow. I had seen a stubborn group. What I was really seeing was a walking wake. Their endurance wasn't in spite of their pain. It was fueled by it. Their love for each other wasn't a liability, it was the engine. Where are you headed? I asked softly. A place my dad heard about on the ham radio before the last station went dark. A community forming near the old national park lodges in the north. They say they are trying to rebuild, not just scavenge. Rebuild. She finally lowered the hatchet an inch. It's probably a fairy tale, but you're going anyway. We have to go somewhere, she said, echoing my own long-buried thought. To stop was to die. For them, it was a literal truth of the soul. I made my choice then. It was the most illogical, dangerous, and human choice I'd made since the world ended. The basin ahead, I said. It's a choke point. Another Scorcher patrol uses it. They'll be waiting for anyone coming through the wash. Her eyes narrowed. How do you know? Because I've been watching them. Too. From my perch, I know their schedule. I took a slow breath. Let me show you a way around. It's longer, harder, but it's safe. Why? The question was sharp, probing for the lie. I thought of her smile over the prickly pear. I thought of Jack's nod. I thought of the empty, joyless safety of my ranger station, a tomb I'd been patiently furnishing for myself. Because you kept going, I said simply. I led her back to her family. The confrontation around their tiny fire was tense. Jack was protective, Sarah deeply suspicious. Sammy just stared at me with huge, curious eyes. I laid out my map, a real, topographic map, and showed them the alternate route, a series of game trails and dry creek beds that skirted the basin's head. It would add 2 days to their journey. You expect us to trust you? Jack asked, his arm around Sarah. No, I said honestly. I expect you to be smart. Send Chloe with me to scout the first mile tonight. If it's clear, you follow at dawn. If it's a trap, she has my gun. I unholstered my Glock and offered it, but first, to Jack. The ultimate gesture of trust in this new world. He stared at the weapon, then at my face. He saw the same thing Chloe had seen, not a marauder, not a savior, but a tired man who'd forgotten what he was moving towards. He didn't take the gun. He just nodded. That same, silent nod. Chloe and I scouted the path under the cold light of a billion stars. We didn't speak much. The silence was comfortable. At one point, she stopped and pointed to a constellation. Orion, she said. My dad taught me that. Said it's the hunter, always chasing something across the sky. Seems fitting now. She looked at me. You can't go back to your perch, can you? The scorchers will have marked it. I know. So what will you do? I looked north, along the path her family would take. I think, I said, the words feeling strange and new on my tongue, I might keep going for a while, too. The dawn came, pale and pink. The Johnsons packed their cart with their quiet efficiency. As they started up the trail I'd shown them, they fell into their familiar, weary rhythm. Jack and Sarah at the cart, Sammy walking beside it, Chloe on point. I stood at the trailhead, my pack at my feet, no longer a spectator. Sarah was the one who looked back. She didn't smile, but her fierce eyes softened by a degree. She gave that slight, imperceptible nod. Then she turned and faced forward. Jack saw me standing there, waiting. He didn't break stride. As he drew even with me, he simply said, "Cart's heavy, but we could use another set of eyes up ahead. If you're headed that way." It wasn't an invitation to join their family. That wall was still there, and rightly so. It was an offer of shared direction, a temporary alliance in the long, hard walk ahead. It was more than I had, and more than I deserved. I picked up my pack. I didn't fall in beside them. I moved ahead, taking a point position opposite Chloe, scanning the ridges not as a hidden observer, but as a lookout. I heard the crunch of their cart's wheels on the gravel, the soft murmur of Sarah encouraging Sammy, the steady, relentless sound of movement. I thought they'd tire fast, but they kept going. And now, for the first time in a long, long time, so was I. Not because I was fleeing, or hiding, or just surviving, but because I was, however tentatively, following. The road ahead was unimaginable.